Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the Adorama event space, and thank you for coming here this afternoon, and thank you to Adorama for hosting us. My name is Debbie. I'm the Regional Director of APA New York. APA is very proud to be collaborating with Adorama on these monthly events, and we are also proud when we get to collaborate with Joe Sinnott from School of Visual Arts, aka SVA. So it's great to bring all three of us together today. And now a little bit about APA before I introduce Joe. We are American photographic artists. APA exists to provide business tools that help photographic artists of all levels run a smarter, more creative, and profitable business, and we've been doing it for over 40 years. APA has a strong heritage of providing benefits which help our members achieve creative and financial success. And our benefits come in many forms. And by joining APA, individual artists join a community which can amplify their voice on the national stage. Joining is easy. And to make it even easier, right now, for anyone in the audience today, whether you're here in person or watching online, APA is offering you a special discount on membership when you join APA at any level, anywhere in the country. To claim your discount, go to apanational.org. That's apanational.org, and click on the Join button. Then put the code Adorama in to get your $20 discount. There are 5 different levels of membership, starting at just $50, so check them out and choose the level that's right for you. And now, on to SVA and Joe Sinnott, who's here helping us out today. Joe has over 30 years of experience as a staff photographer for 13 WNET, the largest PBS station in the country. And as a faculty member at the School of Visual Arts, Joe's diverse body of work includes celebrity portraiture, news, public affairs, performance, corporate, and communication events. And this webinar is just a little tidbit of the kind of information that you can get if you take one of Joe's classes at SVA Continuing Education. He'll give you the links later. He has new classes starting in June, and we are really thrilled to have him here today. So without further ado, here's Joe Sinnott.
Good evening.
Before Joe gets started, the link she just talked about, APA, is in the chat, pinned to the top. All right, guys, if you want to join. Take it away, Joe.
Thank you very much for coming. Tonight we're talking about photography pricing, how to price your work. If you've ever been in a class with me or heard me talk about this topic before, some of this might be a little bit of a repeat, some of it will be new and different, and I'll be stopping at various points so that people can ask questions, and then at the end I'll take the flood of questions. What do people pay you for? I mean, in the great grand landscape of trading your precious life for money, what do people pay you for? 3 things. People pay you for toil, brains, and responsibility. Toil, the sweat of your brow, picking things up and putting things down, like moving the bags from point A to point B. Brains, like bigger brains are worth more money than tiny brains. Good ideas are worth more money than bad ideas. And in the world of photography, brains usually is just another word for talent, right? Like better pictures are worth more money than less better pictures. And responsibility, being in charge, owning it. How big is it? How complicated is it? How many moving parts are there? What are the logistics? Being in charge of all of that, taking on big responsibility is worth money. In the entire world of work, this is what people pay you for. Some jobs skew more towards one than the other. Like the smartest ditch digger in the world probably makes about the same amount of money as the least smart ditch digger in the world. And corporate CEOs, they don't make their big money because they're necessarily the smartest person in the corporation. They make their big money for being responsible because the buck stops there. Whatever job you work probably involves some combination of these 3 things. So what are you worth? We're going to interact for a second. So I've been taking pictures for money for about 35 years. I'm very fortunate that I've been able to make a living at doing something that I'm good at and that I like for a long time. If we're comparing you to me, maybe you've been taking pictures for less time, or you're just starting out, or you have less experience. There's probably an argument to be made that somebody with more experience who's been doing it longer can prove that that they're worth more money than somebody with less experience who's been doing it less time. But the biggest mistake I see people make is that they think that less experience means massively less money. Let's take those three things again: toil, brains, and responsibility. I'm going to pick you because you're definitely much younger than me. If I'm pitching myself on an assignment and I'll call it a 2-hour business event, right? Like a 2-hour grip and grins business event. Normally I'd open at about $900 for a job like that. Now, you're dressed like this, camera, lens, flash on camera, taking pictures of people, like having fun. Would you do that job for less than $900?
Yes.
Okay. So in a little while, we're going to talk about how much less and how you think about that. But assuming that you might be worth a little bit less than me, it's not like you're worth half, or it's not like you're worth a quarter. You're worth more than that. Because of those three things, toil, brains, and responsibility, two of those things are no different between you and me. The amount of toil we're going to put in on the job is not going to be any different just because I've been doing it for longer. The job's the job. And the responsibility is no different between you and me. The only thing that might be different between you and me is brains, quality of the pictures. And without looking at any pictures at all, it's possible my pictures are better, so I'm worth more money. But it's also possible that your pictures are better, in which case you're worth more money. And the amount of time I've spent doing it doesn't have anything to do with it. Right? Do you smell what I'm cooking? Are you picking up what I'm putting down? The idea that you might sell yourself at a lower price than somebody who's been doing it for longer, that might make sense. And it's often the case that people that are younger than me can sell themselves at lower prices. I just turned 60. So my expenses are higher. My lifestyle is different. There's only so low I can go before I'm eating a loss. People that are younger have a competitive advantage that way. And I'm not saying that you should sell yourself on price. I'm not saying that you should race to the bottom. All I'm saying is don't be so prepared to sell yourself really low. Because between you and the most experienced, gifted photographer in the world, mostly that job is the same. Things that you should think about when you're trying to figure out your fee. How much work do you have to do before and after the job? Some jobs, you shoot a couple hundred pictures. Some jobs, you shoot a couple thousand pictures. The amount of time you spend sitting at home going, arrow, 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 delete, arrow, zoom, arrow, delete, back, forward, zoom, delete, ooh, delete. Like, the amount of time you spend doing that, that's time. You got to get paid for your time. We don't normally articulate that time as part of the job. You build it into your fee. How much equipment do you have to carry? I charge more money to show up with 200 pounds worth of gear on a cart than I do to show up with one bag that fits over my shoulder. More gear is more work. What extra services are you providing? We're going to talk more about that. I am going to lead by saying for commercial assignments, retouching is usually not included in the price. Your client may ask you what retouching costs, but unless you've negotiated some threshold of retouching as part of the price, that is above and beyond your estimate after the fact. How fast does the job need to happen? Pictures that I deliver in 3 days don't need to cost as much as pictures that I need to deliver tomorrow. If I'm shooting today and I'm delivering tomorrow, what am I not doing tonight? Sleeping. And do I get paid for that? I do. How far do you need to go to do the job? Like, are you taking a 1-hour drive? Are you taking a 3-hour drive? Do you have to sit in a chair in the sky? The amount of time you spend, you have to factor that into how much are you going to estimate for an assignment? How many people are on the job? Not just like you, an assistant, models, stylists. These are all people that you may be paying that are under your supervision that potentially your insurance has to cover. More people is more responsibility. Responsibility is work. You get paid for work. How good does the work need to be? And I will grant you, We all try to do our best work all the time. That's the goal. Do your best work all the time. But you can't make $1 out of 15 cents. If the client says, like, I want to photograph a teacup on black velvet with an elephant, they clearly have money to spend, right? Elephant rental is expensive. If the client has money to spend, if they have resources to invest in the assignment, that affords an opportunity to do bigger, better things. You can't make things that you can't make. If there's no money to pay for things, there's no money to do those things. We all try to do our best work, and you want to do the best you can out of the resources that you have to work with. And knowing what those resources are gives you a pretty good insight into what the client expects from the assignment, what the end result should look like. Okay, question.
Kevin in the chat's asking, they feel like the average person might not understand the time it takes to select, edit, might not understand why you need so much gear. How do you convince them otherwise?
I don't. In a very, very real sense, I don't. There was way back when, there was a men's clothing store, Sims. I don't know if you remember Sims. And Cy Sims used to say, an educated consumer is our best customer. And I guess that phrase has stuck with me all these years because it's useful. I suppose there is some amount of education that I have to do. Like I was having a conversation with a client about this last night. They were talking about delivery needs, and I was talking about the challenges associated with those delivery needs. But I don't try to explain to people how much gear I need or how much it costs. I explain to people what I charge. It's not like my rates are ridiculous or out of line with the rest of the industry. There's always somebody willing to do it for less. My strategy for my entire career has just been to wait them out. They'll put themselves out of business. If you don't charge rates that are sustainable for your business, you're not going to stay in business. I'm still here. A lot of people I know are not. That worked out. The time it takes to select and edit, I build that into my estimate. I don't usually articulate it as a separate charge. I just make it be part of the fee. I figure out how much time I'm going to take to shoot. I figure out how much time I'm going to take sitting in front of the computer going arrow, arrow, delete, arrow, zoom, arrow, delete. And then I formulate a fee that's based on that. If the client says, why is it so high? Usually my initial response is, it's not so high. You're asking for a lot. This is a phrase I find myself using over and over and over again in my classes. And it actually starts with a question. What does more cost? What does more cost? More. The thing that more costs is more. When people want more, it costs more. What do you know? Commerce. How is that? It is worth it to know what other people have been paid for in your market to do the same kind of work. In The Art of War, in the last chapter, the title of the chapter is On the Use of Spies. And I am not saying that you should be like planting listening devices in your client's place of work, but finding out what other people have gotten paid to do the same work, communicating with other photographers you know, finding out what other people charge in your same market for similar kinds of work, gives you an insight into what the market will bear for that kind of work. A little market research goes a long way. It's helpful to know what, and I'm not saying that you should necessarily charge what other people are charging to do the same work, but knowing what other people are charging to do the same work and what they're getting paid to do the same kind of work gives you a really, really good basis to help figure out your own prices. Yes, sir?
Do you ever ask people if they have a budget?
The question is, do I ever ask people what their budget is? And the answer is no. Because if I ask that question, I'm inviting a response that could be none of your damned business. They might not say that, but they might. And if I do, our business relationship is off on the wrong foot. On a very fundamental level, their budget is none of my business because their response is basically, Why do you think that you get to know how much money I have in the bank? It's much better for me to figure out what I want to get paid for the job. If I pitch a number and they go, great, that's great, we'll see you Thursday. Like there's a little devilish person in the back of my brain that goes, damn. Because clearly they were ready to spend more and I like left some money on the table. But there is a bigger, better, smarter, healthier person who's been to therapy in my brain that also says, what are you complaining about? You're getting paid what you asked to get paid to do the work they're asking you to do. What's the problem? And you didn't have to struggle or whinge or fight. Like you pitched a number, they said yes. Easy. Like, why are you complaining that it was easy? And I usually try to listen to that one more than the other one.
Got a question in the chat. Do you itemize all the things, labor, crew, equipment, when sending out invoices or estimates?
I'm going to address this a little later in the slideshow, but there are line items on my estimate and invoice for categories of expense. Transportation covers all of the things associated with transportation. Gas, mileage, tolls, airfare, taxis, subway rides, anything that's transportation goes there. Assistance and talent, like that line covers photo assistant, prop stylist, potentially models, like anybody other than me who I'm paying on the assignment. On commercial jobs with billable expenses, commercial photography is a 100% cost recovery business. So all of the expenses that are associated with a given assignment are billable back to the client. You have to account for them responsibly and honestly. So the short answer is yes. I don't do that with every kind of assignment because some assignments have small numbers of, small amounts of expenses, and I just fold it into the fee. Another thing that helps you figure out your fee is knowing how much money your client has, because how much money do you have? Please give it all to me. Ultimately, that is my goal. My goal is to empty everybody's bank account and to walk away with all of the money in the world. The client's goal is different. The client's goal is to try to get me to do the job for 2 cheese sandwiches and a shaker of salt. That's why we negotiate. That's business. But seriously, 3 things you need, like whenever you're starting negotiating any assignment, there are 3 things you need to know. How much money do you want to make? How much money are you going to start negotiating at? Which is going to be a higher number than the amount of money you want to make. And what is the lowest amount of money that you will do the assignment for? In a lot of ways, this is the most important number you need to know. Knowing what you want to make, that's probably not that hard to figure out. Knowing where you're going to start negotiating at, it's going to be more money than what you want to make. But knowing your walkaway number, that one's much more of a struggle. Your walkaway number is the number below which you will not do that assignment. You will say no. So let's suppose I start, let's play this game again. So the $900 assignment, would you be willing to do the job for less than $900, the 2-hour gig?
Yeah, probably.
Good, okay. What is the lowest amount of money you would do that assignment for?
For 2 hours and all the labor afterwards, like 400 to 500.
All right, let's say 400, okay? Because 400 to 500, that's a 25% difference. That's a big difference. Let's say 400, which means if the client turns around to you and says, oh my God, I'm so sorry, we don't have $400, but could you do it for $350? You will say, I'm so sorry. I really wish that I could work with you. I hope you'll keep me in mind if another opportunity arises where our resources align better. You're, like at $350, you're going to say no. You're going to say no?
Yeah.
Okay. And what about at $375? At $375, would you say no?
If I hear the number 3, I'm starting with
All right, I think you're fixating on the wrong thing. What about $385? Would you do it for $385? It's only $15 less than your $400 number.
I guess at that point.
So 400 was not your walkaway number. You blew it.
Where does it end, kid? Where does it end?
You blew it. Your walkaway number is your walkaway number. If 400 is your walkaway number and they say $399.99, one, they're being a jerk. But two, if they say 1 penny less than $400, you say, I'm so sorry. I really wish that I could work with you on this. I hope you'll keep me in mind for another opportunity.
There's a thing in my mind where it's like, if I walk away from an opportunity, it's almost like $0 in my head now. Like I didn't get nothing. I didn't get the job. You know,
And this is the point, I guess in a way this is the point I'm trying to make. If you don't have a walkaway number, you never know what you're worth. You're probably not going to pick a walkaway number that is like massively below, that is so out of line with the rest of the industry. Like if they say 400 and you say 200, they weren't serious. I had somebody reach out to me recently. Like they were referred to me by somebody else. They needed somebody that night. It was like a quick 3-hour thing, very like relatively simple. And then they gave me the number, $100. And I said, I'm so sorry. I would love to be able to work with you. I hope you'll keep me in mind for some other opportunity. And like they asked me what my rate was. And I said, for this kind of work, I usually start at $4.50 an hour with a 2-hour minimum. There's no reconciling the gap between $1,350 and $100. And you're never gonna. Don't worry about those jobs. The thing I would suggest is if you hit that bottom number, if your client comes back below that bottom number, but you're still interested in the assignment for whatever reason, your bottom number describes a set of conditions that have been defined by the client, right? That set of conditions could be the duration of the assignment. It could be when the pictures are due. It could be things like that. What if you can redefine the assignment? If the client is doing a 2-hour gig, what if you say, well, all right, for $350, I couldn't give you the full 2 hours, but I could give you an hour and a half. Or for $350, when do you need the pictures? Oh, you don't need the pictures for 2 weeks? All right, if I got 2 weeks to deliver the pictures, I have a lot of opportunity to get other things done in between. If you redefine the assignment, your bottom number no longer applies. Now you can think of a new bottom number for the redefined assignment. But for a given set of parameters, whatever your bottom number is, that's your bottom number. And if you don't stick to it, you're never going to know what you're worth. And everybody's always going to know that they can negotiate you as low as they want to go. That's their job. Their job is to get their goods and services for the smallest amount of money that they can pay. Your job is different. Okay? How are we doing so far? A little advice about negotiating in general. Don't give people immediate numbers. It's a fool's game. It's a negotiating tactic. You don't have to do it. You're walking down the street, your client calls, hi, can you give me a ballpark figure on this? You're walking down the street on your phone. There are taxis, trains, like it's New York City. Are you really in a good situation to be thinking about all of the moving parts in a legitimate estimate while you're walking down the street on your phone? Don't get me wrong. If you can do that and do it well, do whatever makes sense to you. But I'm not recommending it. When people ask you for immediate numbers, they're engaged in a negotiating tactic. They want to try and lock you into a range before you've had a chance to really think about it. And they're playing on all of our motivation to work. We all want to work. We want to work as much as possible. Don't give immediate numbers. Nobody ever really needs them. The negotiating tactic is to lock you into something before you've had a chance to really think about it, to ask the questions that you need to ask to come up with a proper estimate. And there's nothing wrong with them doing that. There's just something wrong with you falling for it. Don't fall for it. That like, oh, but couldn't you give me a ballpark? I'm so sorry. I'll be back at my office in just a few minutes. I have a few questions. I'll be able to ask proper questions then and get real numbers. Oh, but like we just need it really, really fast. I know, I'm so sorry. I really want to help you out. Now, like I said, I'll be back to my office in just 15 minutes. Don't fall for it. They don't really need it. You don't really need to give it. Try not to make deals walking down the street on your phone and try to do business in writing as much as possible. talking on the phone and talking about the details of an assignment and like payment and rates and value added, the phone is not a great way to do that. Try to do business in writing as much as humanly possible and try and keep your writing all in one channel. The one I use for business, email. And I'm not saying that all of the different messaging platforms we have to communicate are things that you can't or shouldn't use. But whichever one you start using to make a deal, try and stay inside that channel. Any questions about that? Moving right along.
I have one question.
Shoot.
How often do people try to negotiate you down and ask your numbers?
The question is, how often do people try to negotiate me down? Almost every time, which is why I start with a higher number than what I actually want to make. Sometimes people don't try to negotiate me down at all. Sometimes people do. The times that people do, definitely more than the times that people don't. Okay? And by the way, there are clients and assignments and projects I work on where one of the reasons why I think that people don't try to negotiate me down is they know that I won't.
When you're trying to determine what your price is, there's the labor aspect. How do you determine where you land in that scale of pricing? Do you go as low as like minimum wage, all the way to like as high as you want to? Or
I would never, so the question is, how do I determine the range of pricing? I usually start by trying to figure out my time at about $4.50 an hour. That's different when somebody wants to book me for a full day. Usually I'm trying to get about $3,000 a day, $2,000 for a half day. There are people that charge more. There are people that charge less. There is no world where minimum wage compensates me for my time and the expense of doing business. Just my capital equipment expenses, amortized over the range of assignments I'm going to use that equipment for, $15 an hour wouldn't cover it. And then all of my other business expenses, the business insurance, the cell phone bill, the internet service, like there are a lot of business expenses. There's no world where minimum wage is going to make that happen for you. I am going to submit, excuse me, that you might be worth more than $4.50 an hour. You might be worth less than $4.50 an hour. I know very few people who are competent in handling a camera and taking pictures for other people who are worth less than $200 an hour. And that's in my mind, that's a spectacularly low number. Like the thing I'm talking about there are, fresh, like people going to school for it, like photography students. Does that give you a range? I live to serve. Sure.
In the chat, they're asking, is it unethical or tacky to change contingency fee and an additional overhead fee at percentage of the total invoice?
Yes. The short answer is yes. You should. Anybody ever take an airplane anywhere? Anybody ever take a plane? And when you go to get on the plane and they charge you a whole bunch of fees that you didn't know about, how do you feel about that? Does it feel honest or crooked? Right. Maybe it's not crooked, but it doesn't feel honest, does it? It is much better to tell, believe it or not, the essence of a good business transaction is honesty. And people knowing what they should expect to pay, knowing what you're charging them, that's an important part of having a good business reputation. I want to be clear that I'm talking about a defined assignment that you're fulfilling within the parameters described. You show up on the job and they change the parameters of the assignment and they make the assignment bigger. What does more cost? More. And the important thing there is not to proceed with the assignment as it has changed at the lower rate that you agreed to. The important thing there is that as soon as the client describes a change in the assignment, you need to say to the client, these changes are going to increase the cost of the assignment. And that's that.
Someone's asking, how many hours is a day's work or a half day?
How many hours? Shweta. Hi, Shweta. How many hours is a day's work? Like normal business hours are 8 hours. You can make your day be as many hours as you want or as few as you want. Like I normally think of my work day, my shoot day as being 9 hours long because on a 9-hour day, I want to sit down and eat lunch for an hour if I can. I tend to think of my half days as being 4 or 5 hours long. No more than 5 hours. Once we go over 5 hours, that's a full day. Once we go over 5 hours, it's not a half day anymore, is it? Right? How'd we do? Okay.
Ready to go?
Yeah. Billable expenses. There are basically two kinds of business expenses as a photographer. Billable expenses are expenses associated with the assignment that you're working on for a given client. One assignment, one job, one client. It includes a lot of the things that you see on this list. It probably includes things that aren't on this list, but these show up as line items on your invoice. If you gave your client an estimate, there are estimated costs associated with all of these things that will actually happen on your job. If you're not hiring models, there's going to be no line item for models. If there's no retouching, or you're not hiring stylists, or there are no props, there's going to be nothing on those lines. They're going to be blank. But these expenses are above and beyond your fee and don't have anything to do with your fee. This is just what it costs to get the materials and the expertise that your client has asked for to do the job that they're asking you to do. Another kind of expense is overhead. The expenses associated with the day-to-day operations of your business. You don't bill these to your client as line items. The cost of my cell phone is not billed to my client. Like if I figure out how much I pay for cell phone service per day and I spend a day working on a job, there's not a cell phone charge for that day. Those expenses, the expenses that are just the overhead that it takes to run your business, are part of your fee. You don't wind up putting your entire fee in your pocket. Part of your fee pays for the expenses that it takes to operate your business. Knowing what your overhead is going to have an impact on what you can charge as a fee. You can't charge less money than it takes for you to stay in business. You need to have a fee that not only gives you enough money to pay your business overhead, but also enough money to pay your living expenses, which I'll talk about in a minute. Beyond your photography fee, the creative fee for being a photographer, taking beautiful pictures, there are also value-added fees. Pre-production or prep days, post-production days if they're relevant to the assignment, travel days, which are usually billed at about half your day rate, the kit fee, which I'll talk about more in a minute. The raw processing fee is usually charged as a unit cost per image. It doesn't apply to every kind of commercial photography, but if you're doing something that involves a raw processing fee, you usually charge a flat amount of money to process each raw file as a high-resolution TIFF that your client is going to use for precision purposes. Retouching. I already talked a little bit about retouching, but I want to talk about the kit fee for just a minute. A kit fee is a way to amortize the cost of your capital equipment expenses in a way that you're only charging the assignments that use those tools for the use of those tools. It is kind of like this. It's almost as though you're renting equipment to your client that you actually already own. And I'm not opposed to the kit fee. It is far more prevalent in the industry now than it was when I started. In the early days of the kit fee, it was mostly about finding a way to recover the expenses of massively expensive new digital cameras when measured against most photographers' capital investment. Most photographers, commercial photographers, probably own $20,000 or $30,000 worth of equipment. You buy a $20,000 camera and another $10,000 worth of lenses, You've doubled your capital equipment investment. If you're going to make the investment in a tool like that, how do you recover the cost? One way is to raise your rates. But if you raise your rates, you have the potential of pricing yourself out of your current clients. Another way is to just raise your rates on the assignments where you use that particular super expensive piece of gear. That's where kit fees came from. And now they get used more profligately and a little differently. Whether or not you decide to do that is completely up to you. I don't do kit fees. I recover the expenses on all of my capital equipment by building it all into my fee. Everybody's paying for my equipment on some level over time, just as would be true for any business. If you're charging a kit fee, the implication is that your creative fee might be a little lower so that your rates, at the end of the day, broadly align with the rates of people that don't charge a kit fee and just charge a higher creative fee. How you do it is completely up to you. Just be consistent, do it with everybody, and be consistent in the way that you do it. Don't charge massively different amounts of money for the same kit on an assignment by assignment basis. Set numbers that are fixed and keep them there until you have a reason to raise those numbers for everybody. Questions?
There's one in the chat. Oh.
You were mentioning about shooting an event, a couple hours or something like that, here in the city. And do you charge for transportation, your cab going there and back?
So the question is, do I charge transportation expenses when I shoot events? And the answer is no. Because for events, I've decided to just fold those costs into my fee and make it be that way. Because most of my clients for whom I shoot events, they're not really interested in variable line item invoices for what is basically identical work on it, every time they ask me to do it. I've just made my fee accommodate the average of those costs so that it works out for me. What was the
person who was asking about additional fees being tacky is also asking, do you transparently share with clients that charge will include on top of the cost, or do you not charge tax?
Sales tax? Are we talking about sales tax? Sales tax applies to exchanges of goods. So I've made it my mission in life to never exchange goods. I don't charge sales tax because the law does not require me to charge sales tax. Any others? Did I miss any other questions? Yes, sir.
About sales tax, I used to charge sales tax all the time when I was shooting commercially, versus events. Now, almost all my deliveries is through the internet, and so supposedly through the internet, you don't have to charge.
That's correct, because you're not delivering if I drop that stuff onto an optical disc and hand it to the client, theoretically I should be charging sales tax on the optical disc. And film and other material, like when I hand somebody a thing, whatever that thing is, like something made of matter as defined by physics, sales tax. Like other things that are ephemeral, what do you know? Ephemeral. Okay?
So,
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
your friend Shweta is asking, I imagine you can't charge a kit fee unless your client base is fixed and you use the same equipment across these clients.
You know what? When I want to have the absolutely worst, most horrible argument possible with my spouse, I use words like always and never. Like always and never are definitely the key words to having the worst possible argument. So I'm not going to say always and never to something like this. I can probably create a situation in my mind where I charge a kit fee. Well, first off, it doesn't matter whether your client base is fixed or not. If you're using the kit fee model in your pricing, that's something you should be doing with all of your clients, new and old. And it doesn't really matter whether I use the same equipment with all of these clients because the kit varies. And you charge different amounts of money for kits that are comprised of different assets. The kit fee that I charge for this camera and this lens and this other lens is not because I charge a different fee for this camera and this lens than I do for this camera and the other lens and the fourth lens. So figuring out what I'm charging for each item in my capital equipment inventory, that's something I've got to sit down and do. And then once I do it, when I put together a kit on a given assignment, I total up all of those numbers from my list, and that's my kit fee for that assignment. It's not like my kit fee is always $400 or always $600 or always $1,000. It depends on what's in the kit. Okay? There's a typical cycle when you're doing commercial assignments. Estimate, confirmation, invoice. I'm not going to talk about the whole cycle and all the details associated with it, but like an estimate is something that you draw up after getting information from your client. What kinds of photographs are you creating? What kinds of usage rights do they want? How far do they want to use those pictures? How many eyes are going to see them over what period of time? When are the pictures due? When are you supposed to deliver them? What sorts of other fees, like value-added fees, are going to be part of the estimate? All of these things are part of making an estimate, including an advance. If you're working on a commercial assignment, getting an advance to cover your expenses is not an uncommon practice. I don't ask for an advance every time I shoot a commercial job. For me, I have a $1,000 threshold. Once my out-of-pocket expenses hit $1,000, I'm asking for an advance. And most people are not going to whinge about it because you're not a bank, because none of us are banks. Have any of you ever been to a bank? Have any of you ever borrowed money from a bank? Nobody has ever borrowed money from a bank because banks don't loan you money. They rent it to you. And they charge you to rent you the money. An advance allows you to have the money to do the pre-production work and to accumulate the materials and to pay the labor associated with working on that client's specific assignment. It's the client's money, not your money. And you have to track it and account for it and keep receipts and know that you can itemize and justify every nickel of that money that you spent. But you're not going to start working on the assignment and buying things and accumulating things and booking things and putting deposits on things until you have the money to do it with. And if your client wants those things, your client will provide an advance so that you have the money to do it. At the end of the assignment, you'll return any remaining advance money to your client by deducting it from the bill. If they gave you a $2,000 advance and your fee is $3,000 and the actual expenses were $1,700, there's $300 worth of advance money left over, right? You don't write them a check for $300, you just deduct it from the amount due. You were going to ask me a question, sir.
Yes. You don't ask for a deposit to save the date?
That's different. I'm going to get into that when I talk about photography markets. Oh, the question was, do I ask for a deposit to save the date? That's different. That's not an advance on expenses. And I'm going to talk about that more when I talk about photography markets, commercial and consumer. When the job is completed, you send the bill and you include the fees and expenses minus any advance. Remember that your fee not only has to cover your business expenses, it has to cover your life. Figuring out a fee that's appropriate for your work and your clients and your assignments is in part about knowing how much it costs you to live. At periodic intervals, I sit down and figure out how much it costs me to live each month. And I do it over a 3-month period so I can average it out because some months are more expensive to live than others. But knowing how much it costs me to live each month gives me some pretty good insight in how much money I have to make each month. That does not mean that, oh wow, I only got one, it cost me $10,000 to live this month and I only have one job to shoot, so I have to charge that client $10,000. That's probably not going to work out for you. But knowing how much it costs you to live does give you some insight into how to price and structure your work. There are two primary markets in photography: commercial work, which is executed for a business purpose, and consumer work that is executed for a personal purpose. This is a very general way of talking about this. I don't want you to think it's binary, because some things are How many of you have heard of an entertainment called figure skating? Anybody ever heard of figure skating? All right. Is figure skating a sport or an entertainment? Both. Both. It's both. What do you know? Human things can be both. Human things are not light switches. Human things can be both. And sometimes it's like figuring out what, commercial work, if I'm shooting business portraits for a corporation to use on their website and the corporation is paying me, very easy to talk about commercial work. Consumer work, you're shooting a wedding, pretty obviously consumer work. What about an actor's headshot? Is an actor's headshot personal or is it commercial? Why not both? Why not both? Right? Because you're not doing business with a business, you're doing business with an individual. Why not both? Generally speaking, though, it's easier to think about photography as breaking down into these two types of work. Commercial work largely breaks out into advertising, editorial, and public relations. I might be the only person that makes public relations a different thing. Most people lump public relations into advertising. And although there are a lot of good reasons to do that, and I know why I'm not arguing with the people that do it, they've got good reasons for doing it. I don't, because if you price public relations jobs the same way you price advertising jobs, you are likely to price yourself out of the public relations job. Advertising jobs usually have at least comparatively, very high budgets. And of these three, editorial jobs tend to have the lower budgets. Public relations kind of falls in between. Advertising, like we've all seen advertising, it sells or promotes a product or service. The space the ads occupy was paid for. When you're flipping through a magazine, you can tell the difference between the articles and the ads, right? Because the pages that the ads are on, those were paid for by the advertiser. The pages that the articles are on, that's owned by the magazine. That's their own space. The amount that an advertiser pays for space varies by where the space is in the magazine, how big the space is, not just magazines, but anywhere. How big is the space? Where is it? How many issues does it circulate? How many colors is the ad in? All of these things affect the price that an advertiser pays for that space. And knowing what the advertiser pays for that space gives you a little insight into maybe what you should be charging, right? So if you know what magazines the picture is going to show up in, getting their media kit and knowing how much your client is going to pay for those pages gives you a pretty good idea of how much they're going to spend on that campaign, right? On the use of spies. Maybe spies are just good research. Advertising rates are usually described either as day rates or fee for use. At the end of the day, in my mind, I tend to think of all rates as being day rates because ultimately I'm getting paid for a day, but that's not necessarily the way you articulate it to your client. Day rates are about describing how, like a full day's work versus a half day work. Your half day rate should definitely be higher than your full day rate. Higher than half of a full day rate. If your full day is $3,000, your half day should minimally be about $2,000. Your half day rate should be 2/3 to 3/4 of your half day rate. Remember that every time you work a half day, there's an argument to be made that you're taking a little bit of a loss because who's going to hire you for the other half of the day? Nobody. And if somebody else comes along and wants to hire you for the same day, for a full day, you've eaten a loss on that day. Your half day rate, everybody expects your half day rate to be higher than half of your full day rate. Fee for use is about describing your fee in terms of the number of eyes that are going to see it. It relates back to the Copyright Reform Act, and ultimately it is the more widely your picture is going to get used, the more you're going to get paid for that use. Editorial pictures are used to illustrate articles. They're editorial content. The publisher owns the pages that the picture is going to show up in. The pictures are associated with articles that are written for the magazine. The rates are much lower than advertising, or they tend to be much lower than advertising, but the usage is much narrower. The typical narrow usage for a magazine is called First North American Rights, where they can use the picture during the period of time that that issue is out, and that's it. Advertising rates are much higher, in part because the usage is usually much, much broader. Editorial rates are often described as full day, half day, or hourly, or as space rates. Every time I talk about space rates, people tell me nobody does that anymore, and then somebody comes up to me and says, this magazine wants to pay me space rates, what do I do? So I guess some people are still doing it. Space rates, instead of paying you like day rate or half day rate, they pay you by the number of pictures of you they're going to use and how large they're going to use them. 2-page spread, full page, half page, quarter page, and spot. Spot being anything smaller than a quarter of a page. It's not common for every assigned subject to get used when you're doing an editorial job, and it is smart to get a commitment for usage minimums. Like, all right, I'm willing to work for space rates, and you'll negotiate what the space rates are, but under no circumstances can the total bill come to less than X, whatever it is. Or some people that do space rates, they'll do a combination of both. They'll pay you a very, very, very small day rate, and then space rates for all of the pictures that they use on top of that. Public relations are pictures that are shot that are about promoting something, but not necessarily about selling it. The space that those pictures show up in is not paid for. The people that are creating the pictures in the context of trying to generate influence. Like this is a page from the online press room of a place I used to work, and this place creates pictures to promote their television programs. And they make those pictures available to press outlets to promote their television programs. And people that download these pictures agree to the terms, which means you can only use them for editorial promotion of our programs, of this program. And from the point of view of the people looking at those pictures, they can't tell the difference between those and editorial content. If somebody's going to write a review about a TV show and they want a picture, and they don't or can't send a photographer to photograph that TV show being made, maybe they can go to the online press room and get the picture they need for the review that they're writing. And that's where PR pictures come into play. The potential scope of use is wide, although the duration is usually kind of limited. The rates are significant, and although they are definitely higher than editorial, they are also smaller than advertising. With consumer work, you're not doing the same thing. With consumer work, you're involved in something called package rates. When you're doing weddings and family pictures and family events, pictures that you do for people, usually what you're doing is you're selling a package. It's a defined set of goods and services for a specific flat fee. For this size wedding with this many things, I charge this much. For the wedding with bigger, more albums and more prints and longer, I charge this much, which is more. You need to, when you're figuring out what your package rates are going to be, you also have to figure out what your package overhead is going to be. How much is your photo assistant? How many prints are you going to make? How much does it cost to build albums? What is your sort of average transportation expenses? These are all things you have to think about when you're coming up with package rates. And of course, what will the market bear? What do other photographers in the same area that you're working in charge for their services? Once again, I'm not saying that you necessarily have to charge the same amount, but if everybody else in your area is charging $5,000 for a wedding and you want to charge 10, you are competing with people like in a challenging environment. Because if the other photographers are charging 5, what is it you bring to the table that makes you worth twice as much money? And maybe you bring something to the table that's worth twice as much money, but really think about that before you do it. a lot of the expenses and value-added services associated with commercial work are included in the package. You need to think about what the value of those services are before you determine what your package what your package rates are going to be. It is common and important to get a non-refundable deposit. That's a hold, like a hold the date deposit. Somebody books you, they sign the contract, they give you a deposit, that holds the date. They change their mind later, they're out the deposit, because there's no guarantee that you're going to find somebody else to book you on that same date. If you were to return that deposit, you're now out the deposit and that day's work. So for this type of thing, a non-refundable deposit is common. And although I don't do contracts with every single commercial assignment I do, I always do contracts with consumer assignments. And in some ways, they might be more important. Your contracts should talk about the shooting hours that you're contracted for, what are the payment deadlines, what are the delivery deadlines. There should be a force majeure clause, which basically describes your limit of liability. If everything goes horribly wrong, what are you responsible for? And what are you specifically not responsible for? Contracts define the details of an assignment with the client, and they foster relationships based on trust. Things that are in a contract are not subject to, ideally, they are not subject to, I thought this and you said that. It's all in writing. We all have the same contract. We know what's expected of each other. We know what we are each responsible for. When people say, I don't really want to do contracts, that is a red flag for me, because it could create an opportunity for a very unharmonious and rancorous conclusion. You see all the syllables I got in there? Remember, the contracts are governed by the laws of the state in which you're operating and in which the contract is going to be enforced. Can contracts be verbal?
No.
You are mistaken in the state of New York. In the state of New York, contracts can be verbal. And don't get me wrong, verbal contracts are, by and large, crappy contracts that are hard to enforce. It is not a good way to do business. But in the state of New York, verbal contracts are still contracts. If you find yourselves in a dispute in court, it's going to be a lot of, like, they said, which is challenging and difficult to make anything happen, but they're real. In the absence of a formal contract, other things that are written might be enforceable as a contract. As a choice between a verbal contract and an email chain, which one would you rather have? Email chain, because things are in writing. Because we all read the emails throughout the entire project. We all know what was expected. Okay?
You got a bunch of questions.
Oh, sorry.
That's okay. Ignore everybody. Don't worry about it. All right. So first
Seth,
of all,
I wasn't ignoring everybody. I was only ignoring you.
oh well, what's this button here do? I'll just. So
I keep forgetting I have no leverage in this relationship.
you're in my house, kid.
I am in your house.
Okay, so one is if you've been offered to do work pro bono, basically you're doing the work for free. You said you're going to do it for free. Do you still send the deposit, probably for tax purposes?
No, if I'm doing the work for free, I'm doing the work for free. Free is free.
If are deposits only for weddings, and what about if the clients say I don't do deposits?
If deposits don't only have to be for weddings, there are other large events than weddings. There are coming of age events. There are events in other religions and cultures that are significant. Like weddings pop into my head because that's like the big one that I have the most personal contact with. And I don't do a lot of weddings. Like I do a couple of weddings a year to keep my wedding muscles strong and make sure that I can still do it. But I can think of a lot of situations where I might collect a deposit other than a wedding. But those situations probably don't include meeting somebody in the park to do a quick headshot. They might include doing headshots in the studio as a scheduled day of headshots. Because if I scheduled 6 people, like rent the studio, we're doing headshot day, like this is how much it costs for your slot, and there's a deposit. because if you don't show up, there's money I could have made from somebody that would show up. In that case, I would take a deposit.
What do you do if they say they won't take a deposit, though? They don't do deposits.
I guess you're not interested in working with me.
Yeah, you got your own terms. Stick to them.
Well, in this particular case, when somebody says, I don't do deposits, what are they saying? What they're saying is that they want to avoid any responsibility for committing you to your time, but not committing to work, to actually working with you and paying with you.
It's commitment issues.
So, all right, that's for, like, you don't do deposits. That's fine. Don't give me a deposit. I will book other work for that day.
And then the last one was, what do you think about posting your rates on your website so it's public?
I am opposed to that for two reasons that are actually pretty different. One is
The question is, what do you think about posting your rates on your website so that they're like fixed in public?
the bigger issue is, do you have any pictures of people on your website? Because if you do, and you do not have model releases for those people, and you post your rates, your website is much more arguably advertising instead of a gallery. And if you use somebody's recognizable likeness for advertising without their explicit consent, you have violated the New York Civil Rights Act of 1909. I am not a lawyer, but I could play one on TV. So, like, to use somebody's recognizable likeness to promote a product or service for a trade purpose, you need their explicit consent. And usually the way we acquire that explicit consent is their signature on a model release. And if you don't have their signature on a model release, putting their face next to your prices is problematic. You had a question for me again, sir. That's okay, I'll be here all night. Did we cover those? Okay. I'll be teaching some classes at the School of Visual Arts this summer. Introduction to studio lighting. I've been doing this one for just a couple of years now. It's going pretty well. It's a good class for people that want experience with the most expensive hardware, working with models, getting a strong studio experience in lighting background. Location and event photography, I've been teaching this thing for about 20 years now. This class, we start with a lecture that we do on Zoom, and then we meet together as a class for 3 weeks, photographing live events. Usually we do a music thing and a theater thing and a sports thing. It varies a bit, depends on what I get at different times of year. And then the last week we do a group critique on Zoom. This class is actually a lot of fun. Worst case scenario, you saw a show. Photo Techniques is a technical lecture that I've been teaching for longer than some of you have been alive. Like, I started teaching this class when I used to photograph dinosaurs from the back of my covered wagon.
You used that joke like 6 times.
Because it's a good joke, Seth.
It's immortalized on my YouTube. Now you got to move on.
Kill it. Now I got to hire writers for jokes so that I can do my lecture at Adorama.
Bill me on in your invoice for this.
Photo Technique starts with f-stop, shutter speed, ISO, meters, white balance, color management. In the last class, you'll learn about optics. Like, you're photographing a 6-foot-tall person 110 feet from the stage on a full-frame camera. You want to do half-length pictures. What focal length lens do you need to do that? There's a formula. Business of photography is the much more expanded version of what I'm doing tonight. It covers a lot of different business topics: insurance, copyright, contracts, pricing, and negotiating, content. This is an 8-week class. This class runs on Zoom, just like Photo Techniques does. And the summer finishes with music photography, which happens after location and event photography. And we shoot 4 live music events as a group, and then last week is a Zoom critique. Usually with music, we do 2 indoor things and 2 outdoor things. Kind of depends on what I find each summer. I'm very lucky that I get a lot of venues that are happy for me to bring a class, which, if you've ever tried to bring a big camera into a venue, you know that is a precious, precious gift I'm enjoying. Those are the classes I'm teaching at SVA this summer, and you can follow the link or use the link to see all of them on SVA's webpage. I'm happy to answer any questions. That's my email address. I get paid to answer questions, and I'm more than willing to earn my wages. Oh, I'll do the questions, and then if anybody really gives a damn about what camera I'm walking around with today, I'll answer that question.
All right.
Questions? Yes, sir.
For the event photography class, is there a gear requirement, like lens?
You should have a camera and a lens. That would be precious. Like, you need that. I'm a big advocate. Like, what's the best camera in the world, class? The one you have. I'm a big advocate on teaching people.
No,
how
go
to
buy
get the
stuff.
most out of
Go
whatever
buy
they have.
stuff. No, he's lying. Go buy stuff. How about we sign from the live stream? We'll do in-house. We'll sign from the live stream. We'll do in-house questions. Okay.
Okay.
All right. So thanks. We want to thank Joe for joining us tonight. If you guys have any questions about the APA, link is in the chat, pinned to the top. Of course, hit subscribe because you probably aren't subscribed to this. I promise you. Hit subscribe, hit like, drop comments. Joe checks them every day because he's very, very lonely. Joe, thank you so much. Everybody clap for Joe.
Thank you.